and welcome back. Thank you so much for keeping it TV 47 Prime. Coming up next is a conversation with the EU Ambassador to Kenya, Ambassador Henriette Geiger, a conversation that was had with my colleague Hibak Said, one that ranged across several matters, including EU-Kenya relations. Let's listen in.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're going to be interviewing the ambassador for the European Union, Henriette Geiger. She's just going to be telling us about her tenure. There's going to be a few changes, but she'll be the best to tell us about that. My name is Hibak Said. Thank you so much for joining us. Balozi, how exactly has your tenure been like? How has your journey been like in Kenya?
The journey has been fantastic. So I arrived in August 21. And it was still in the middle of COVID. So everybody was masked. The delegation was mostly in teleworking. So I met the colleagues very sparsely. And it took some time to get back to full operational ability. And also the country was still half in lockdown. So I remember the first meetings. Each time I had to get a COVID test. So almost every morning I had to take the swab and the swab and the swab. So because we needed clearance for every government meeting. So I presented my credentials together with other 6 or 7 masked ambassadors. The president was masked. It was still Uhuru Kenyatta. And most of the ones that presented with me are already gone by now. So I think the only one is left standing is the Barbadian ambassador. Yeah. And the Belgian ambassador is leaving with me on the 31st of July. So since then, 22, of course, we had elections already, national elections. I started here immediately. I thought we have to contribute to have credible elections. So we organized, at the invitation of the government, an electoral observer mission, 150 people observing at big expense. And of course, it was incredible to have them here during months to accompany the last preparations, the rollout. We worked a lot with the IBC. And I particularly worked on youth engagement because I thought the young people have to come out and vote and give their voice. So I came up with a concept whereby I worked with Octopiso and IBC. So Octopiso gave free concerts, and IBC gave the voter registration booth.
Right, Balozi, while we're talking about that, you did see there was a transition into a new government. The Kenya Kwanza government did take over. Diplomatically speaking and even democracy-wise, how exactly was that shift, and how have you been dealing with this particular government?
Yeah, so of course my very first elections here in Kenya, but I was already working on the Horn of Africa in 2007. So from afar, I saw what happened in 2007. So I was prepared that there could be some complications here and there. And we were actually very happy that more or less it went well, the elections, with some difficulties here and there. There was a lot of engagement of the international community over and above our observation, electoral observation. And then, of course, our tasking as diplomatic missions is to engage with the government, also with civil society, private sector, and so on. So that's what we did. And we did our very best that the EU was establishing a very good contact with all of the ministries. And right after the government took office, I took the president to Brussels. And that was his first And this was an eye-opener, basically, to the possibilities of our cooperation. And only a few months later, we had our High Representative here for the first big strategic dialogue on political and security, on trade and investment, on development cooperation. So that set us solidly in a working relationship with the government. And I think for the past four and a half years now, we worked in a very dynamic climate, and the EU has been on the ball in almost all areas. And I think the relationship between the EU and Kenya has deepened and broadened very much during the past years.
Right. Speaking about the president, you do realize that, Dr. William Ruto is very passionate about the Pan-African dream, some of, the concepts that the European Union is also pushing. He has spoken about the financial architecture and the global north and global south perspective. How exactly does the European Union come in? And during your tenure, how exactly have you alleviated some of those problems?
Yeah. So the European Union has been supporting the African Union and the idea of Pan-Africanism from the very start. And I should say, sometimes we felt pretty much alone in that space. So at least in the beginning and even nowadays, there's limited enthusiasm for engagement. And so the EU had many, many ideas and shared its knowledge, because the EU, after all, is an experiment in bringing different nations together and finding the common good and the win-win. So very early on, the European Union financially supported and politically supported. But what we wanted is strong actors in Africa who have the vision and who support it. And I'm very happy when I was very happy when I heard President Ruto's ideas about the reform of the African Union and his vision for a united Africa, especially a united free trade zone. And I think this will be an incredible game changer for Africa. And the EU is very much aligned with that. I would say what the President's ideas are for the AU are 100% the same as the ones the EU has been promoting. And I was very enthusiastic about it and told my headquarters, and we talked about this in Brussels as well with the President. But in regards of the financial architecture of the multilateral system, everybody agrees that multilateralism as it is now is no longer fit for purpose. The world has changed a lot. And if we don't change the multilateral system, it will go down the drain. So we have to adjust and change, but we are all in favor of that. And we have the United Nations, the only hub in the global south of the UN. And we have regular meetings with all the African ambassadors, with Latin American and Caribbean ambassadors, the Asians. Everybody agrees that the UN is worth keeping, that the idea of a global governance is key for the survival of humankind, basically. And the ones who will suffer most are mid-sized countries, because the powerful, they always get their ideas done. They don't need a global governance, but the global governance is there to keep a framework that serves all. And that's why I'm so happy that the President is pushing to have also the African voice powerfully heard. And the EU has supported the idea of a Security Council seat for Africa already for years. Of course, climate for reform is difficult now, but I do think, and the EU is very much working with Kenya and others to have a very ambitious UN reform, because a little bit too late will not do the trick. So we have high hopes for September Ungarn.
Now let's talk about multilateralism for a minute, because you've already brought it up. The UN is quickly losing relevance in the current world, and there's the world order system. Would you say that the European Union still holds a voice within that world order system? And would you say it's still influential in the changes of things? And how is Kenya going to benefit from this?
I think the EU has its challenges right now, but if you look at it, everybody is challenged right now, because adjusting to such a rapidly changed world is not easy. And of course, you know, the EU has 27 member states, and to agree with all of them on one thing is very difficult. So the key challenge we have seen in the recent months is that when a new crisis is evolving around very controversial issues such as the Middle East, it's very difficult to find a common position as EU. And that has weakened our voice, but temporarily. So I see that now we are recovering from that first initial shock, and we are finding our voice. And what is more important, we are redefining our own position in the world. And what we hear from around the globe, not only in Kenya, but also in Kenya, is that our partners say, EU, speak up. You have the political weight, and you have to throw your weight behind the right things for all of us, for the benefit of all of us. This was also something that actually Kenyan president was saying to the European leaders when he was in Brussels. And I think there were similar messages passed also in Finland and Norway. And I'm very happy also that Kenya, under the leadership of the president, is now actively engaged in a coalition of mid-sized countries to push very hard for the right reforms in the UN.
Right, let's talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. It's a geopolitical sore spot, so to speak. And Kenya has been one of the African countries that has been negatively impacted by this through various, situations. If you could just touch on that, how exactly is the European Union coming in? And let's talk about your tenure. How exactly have you, spoken about this particular issue?
Yeah, so as I said, we have the UN here. And we had the first international meeting after the Russian invasion. So this was the United Nations Global Environment Assembly with 6,000 delegates and dozens of ministers from around the world. And that was just days after the invasion. So we got the full brunt of the political impact into that environmental assembly. And this also came to a shock to all the actors in that space. But we managed, and we have seen that many countries, including Kenya, have stood up for the sovereignty of a nation and the territorial integrity of a nation as a guiding principle. So Kenya's voice at the UN very early on with the key speech of the ambassador really set the tone internationally. And ever since, Kenya has been supportive of that principle. And I do understand that there are different voices in the AU, in the African context. And I understand also there are historical reasons why it is like that. But for us and for me here, it was very important to show that, yes, Ukraine is a problem that we are dealing with in Europe, but it's not the only problem in the world. We have never forgotten about our engagement with other partners, such as Kenya, and we have never forgotten about the wars and conflict you're dealing with on this continent, including Sudan and all the other DRC, all the other problems. And the EU has always, but always, financially and politically supported. So we don't want this to be seen as the only issue the EU is interested in, because some wanted to portray us like that. But I think you just have to look at what we do and you see that it's not quite like that.
Right. As we start to wind up, the Economic Partnership Agreement has been one of your wins, so to speak, within your tenure. How exactly has it been going on? What are some of the wins and the joys that you have shared with the Kenyan government and the Kenyan people?
First of all, it was a huge, huge victory for the voice of reason, I think. I was many years ago in Tanzania for signing this agreement with the region, the East African Community region, and we failed miserably. Why? Because Kenya is the only country that has middle income status and therefore doesn't have automatic access, free, duty-free and quota-free access to the European market. The others have it automatically, at least as least developed countries. So there was very little interest on their part to agree on an agreement which also brings obligations for them. So for years, we didn't advance a centimeter until we got from the EA Council a dispensation that Kenya could go and agree with the European Union on a bilateral free trade agreement. So it was also for me a personal satisfaction to be there when it was signed, witnessed by the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and President Ruto personally. So this was, for me, going full circle in my career. So ever since it came into force, our trade has already increased 20%. And at present, next week, we're launching the EPA implementation strategy. So the government has come up with an implementation strategy because the president, and I fully agree with him, we want to double trade with the EU. So in order to do that, we need to become faster. And what we are working on right now is to develop value chains. So we are not just exporting raw products like flowers or fruit and vegetable. You cannot go double the exports with that. By the way, we have an almost balanced trade balance, a balanced trade, how do you call it? There's hardly any trade deficit for Kenya in comparison to other trade relationships. And that's all the more remarkable since at the moment it's still basically fresh produce that is the main export article, but this will change. And also there are very exciting pilots in Kenya now, for example with tea, to get geographical indicators. And on tea, Equity Bank started a cooperation with France. Right. And the tea that is going to Europe now has already multiplied by 30 in the price. I mean, and if you look at that and the power that it could have for other value chains, I think we can double really in a couple of years.
Right. Balozi, any final sentiments? What's next for you?
Next is my retirement.
Right. Congratulations. Yay.
Yeah, so this, I said it already before to my own colleagues. It has been the best job I ever had. I felt so welcome, and I felt I really could make a difference. And I found so many willing actors to engage with us. Not only government, I put a lot of emphasis on civil society, empowering women, empowering youth. So we are not only looking at our official relations, but we want to engage with the entire population. And this year we're celebrating 50 years of our relationship. So we decided to make this a year of celebration. So focusing on education exchanges, on cultural exchanges, on science and innovation. There are so many things, and I think especially in youth exchanges and higher education and science and on innovation, we have so much potential. I have endless ideas, and I think my successor will get a long list of ideas that I haven't been able to implement yet. And I'm sure he will take up the baton and start racing. And I think we have achieved a very good platform in terms of very solid, broad relations. And so he can just build up on it. And I just hope that you get through the next year without major economic downturn, no major turmoils during the elections. So, because we don't want to have any setbacks, we want to stay at that level, also in terms of macroeconomics, and then take it from there. Finally, today is a very special day because Italy signed the third labor mobility agreement of a member state with Kenya, following Germany and Austria. So Italy is the third one, and we have very high hopes that Kenya will become an even stronger collaborating force, because if you look at Europe and Kenya, you have an inverse age pyramid. Europe is aging, and Kenya is a very young population, well educated. So, and the European continent needs skilled professionals to help with our own economy. So I do think a lot will happen in that space in the future.
Right, you've said this is a year of celebration, Balozi, and we do celebrate you and your tenure here in Kenya. We've been talking to the ambassador of the European Union, Henriette Geiger. She has just been telling us how her journey has been like for the past 5 years here in Kenya, and some of her wins and challenges. And of course, it's been a very